Hey, what's up everybody? Alasia Gray here. Actress, educator, creator, activist, all around black girl magic personified. Now last time you all saw me, I brought to you the whimsical piece, Acting While Black, which chronicled some of the ridiculousness I've experienced in the arts, all while trying to do my job. Now, in that piece, I briefly touched on what that looks like as an arts educator. And fresh off my internationally published essay, Why Are There No Great Kids of Color in the Performing Arts? A rhetorical question, of course. I bring to you yet another educational series, examining arts education while black. Now, in the essay, I examine and explore some of the challenges that kids of color and educators of color face in the arts due to systemic racism. And I'm so excited to drop some gems and highlights for consideration. Now, I do encourage you to, of course, go read the essay, but I'm hoping that in this piece, some seeds are planted. So sit back, relax, and enjoy examining arts education while black. Now, in the first section of the essay, I talk about access and exposure. And we've made so many strides by way of access, from having drama programs in school, enrichment programs after school, theater for young audiences, all these ways kids can actually see theater. But on the exposure front, what are they seeing when they do have theater in their lives? That brings me to representation and diversity on stage. Now, in the essay, I quote TYA USA, 50% of youth under 18 in the United States are kids of color. So it's crazy to think that the world on stage wouldn't represent that. Now, here's a positive impact example and a negative impact example of how this can show up. Negative: when a theater decides to put on a show for young audiences that's based on a book with all black characters, and these young people have read this book and are so excited to see themselves reflected on stage, but they come to the theater and that's not what they see on stage at all. That's a bummer. Positive example: I made history in Colorado playing Sleeping Beauty as a black actress, and the amount of kids whose worldview was shaped was amazing. Not only did they see a black princess on stage, they also saw things like adoption be normalized. My parents happen to be white, I just happen to be black. They also saw an interracial relationship. And like the TYA stat, how many kiddos do we know that are biracial or multiracial? Seeing these things reflected on stage is so important. The next section I get into are hurdles. So two that I focus on first and foremost are financial and geographical hurdles. We all know theater is already pretentious and expensive, so affording even being able to see theater could be a challenge. If you don't have programming in your schools, having to drive to far off organizations just to participate in classes, the cost of those classes, maybe theater-based field trips. Now, geographically, I once had parents driving close to an hour from home just so their young person can take classes with me as a black educator. These are considerations. Now, the next hurdles I get into are a bit more insidious. So here we go. Starting with, ding, 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 material being presented. Is the material white-centered, outdated, not culturally relevant? Of course our young people are gonna feel disconnected. We also have issues like, when you do put a young person of color in a role, is it oppressive or exploitive? And let's not forget the instances where all caution is just thrown to the wind and cultural appropriation happens. Another insidious hurdle that shows up is by way of microaggressions and blatant ignorance that comes from peers and educators. Things like othering. While you're doing basic activities like warm-ups or just being on stage, being asked about your hair or your accent or your name or your heritage. Forget about comments during casting and directions that might be given to you. Well, you're Asian, can't you do a Chinese accent? Ooh, can you be a little bit more ghetto? In the dressing room, and the comments about your complexion while trying to do makeup, or again, your hair, and wig consideration. If you have an amazing young black actress playing Annie, maybe we consider not giving her the red-headed Annie wig, and let's give her a more culturally appropriate wig. Other comments I've heard, we can't dye their hair, or when you have black skin like them, these are things that are just unacceptable. Costume considerations, nude tights that aren't nude for everybody. Another thing I talk about is unconscious bias and how that shows up with educators. And we already know school is already the site of trauma for a lot of young people of color, but that's another series. How that shows up in theater education. Not believing our young students of color when they might tell you about an instance of cultural insensitivity. Not cultivating their ideas or thinking they're abstract concepts because they're not the norm. Choosing not to fund projects that they're interested in. Students of color feeling labeled if they speak up. Now, I recall teaching an amazing spoken word unit to not even theater kids, but language arts kids. And I remember the only black girl in the class wrote this incredible piece titled, "I Thought You Cared," all about how she's treated different in school, how she doesn't feel like her teachers care. And I kid you not, after watching this amazing episodic project that we put on, the classroom teacher said, "Hey, so-and-so, didn't you write a piece? We didn't see yours in there." How quickly she forgot. Now, the next sections I get into in the essay are all about the importance of diversity of educators in the arts. Having diverse educators is a win for any educational space, not only for bringing culture and diversity in curriculum, for also fighting for our young kids of color. There are also so many things that BIPOC educators have to navigate in our teaching day. We have the positive teachable moments about race and difference. In Acting While Black, I gave the example of the kiddo asking why my hands were two different colors because she literally has never seen a black person in real life. That's crazy to me. Teachable moment, but also something I had to navigate in my teaching day. Kiddo after Sleeping Beauty saying, "You don't look like the one from the movie." Another amazing teachable moment. And these moments wouldn't happen if there isn't diversity on stage and diversity in your educators. I talk about the challenges that educators of color face in advocating for our young students of color and for ourselves and for diverse material and true equity in spaces. We get the same type of discipline and oppression and gaslighting and told we can't talk about race. I've been made a case study and asked, "Oh, well, are you just uncomfortable teaching when raising important issues?" Told we need to keep you close and in the building so that they could monitor me. It's ridiculous. These are things that we go through as educators of color. And then what happens when we just decide to leave those spaces? It's a loss for the space. It's a loss for those students. Ooh-wee. Now, at the end of the essay, I talk about solutions. Again, starting to plant some of those seeds. Those things include thinking about how we engage our students of color. For our white colleagues, making sure there's more advocacy and allyship. Thinking about the material you present. Whose experiences are you considering? Allowing young people to devise their own work. Let them be published playwrights and the people who are creating the new canon. Allowing them to bring their culture. Let's talk about your abuela. Let's talk about Ramadan. Let's infuse hip-hop like Hamilton. Let's also add some languages that aren't English, some Spanish, some Mandarin. In addition to the classics, presenting diverse work and inclusive work. And just so we're not cultural appropriating, if you don't have the students reflective of the work that's diverse that you want to present, you can still read that work. Roles you're putting young people in that aren't race specific. Sleeping Beauty wouldn't have had as great of an impact if my director didn't cast me as that role. And finally, utopias are so important for our young people of color to be creating unapologetically with educators of color who can cultivate their ideas. Whew, so much there. But I truly hope that we can all take heed of these important considerations for our young artists of color coming up, raising our awareness levels, our critical consciousness, our cultural competency, so that our young artists of color can have safe, equitable, diverse, inclusive environments so that their talents can be maximized and they can all truly feel and be great. Please check out my essay. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you for my next series.